The 26th of December, Boxing Day, Part 2 of the Pickwick Papers by Charles Dickens. Here we go. Such was the progress of Mr. Pickwick and his friends by the Muggleton Telegraph on their way to Dingley Dell. And at 3 o'clock that afternoon they all stood, high and dry, safe and sound, hale and hearty, upon the steps of the Blue Lion, having taken on the road quite enough of ale and brandy to enable them to bid defiance to the frost that was building up the earth in its iron fetters, and weaving its beautiful network upon the trees and hedges. Mr. Pickwick was busily engaged in counting the barrels of oysters and superintending the disinterment of the codfish, when he felt himself gently pulled by the skirts of the coat. Looking around, he discovered that the individual who resorted to this mode of catching his attention was no other than Mr. Wardle's favourite page, better known to the readers of this unvarnished history, if you read the previous part of the book, by the distinguishing appellation of the Fat Boy. "Aha!" said Mr. Pickwick. "Aha!" said the Fat Boy. As he said it, he glanced from the codfish to the oyster barrels and chuckled joyously. He was fatter than ever. "Well, you look rosy enough, my young friend," said Mr. Pickwick. "I've been asleep, right in front of the tap-room fire," replied the Fat Boy, who had heated himself to the colour of a new chimney-pot in the course of an hour's nap. "Master sent me over with the shay-cart to carry your luggage up to the house. He'd have sent some saddle-horses, but he thought you'd rather walk, being a cold day." "Yes, yes," said Mr. Pickwick hastily, for he remembered how they had travelled over nearly the same ground on a previous occasion. "Yes, we would rather walk. Here, Sam." "Sir," said Mr. Weller. "Help Mr. Wardle's servants to put the packages into the cart, and then ride on with him. We will walk forward at once." Having given this direction, and settled with the coachman, Mr. Pickwick and his three friends struck into the footpath across the fields, and walked briskly away, leaving Mr. Weller and the Fat Boy confronted together for the first time. Sam looked at the Fat Boy with great astonishment, but without saying a word, and began to stow the luggage rapidly away in the cart, while the Fat Boy stood quietly by, and seemed to think it a very interesting sort of thing to see Mr. Weller working by himself. "There," said Sam, throwing in the last carpet bag. "There they are." "Yes," said the Fat Boy, in a very satisfied tone. "There they are." "Well, young 20-stone," said Sam, "you're a nice specimen of a prize boy, you are." "Thank ye," said the Fat Boy. "You ain't got nothing on your mind as makes you fret yourself, have you?" inquired Sam. "Not as I knows on," replied the Fat Boy. "I should rather have thought, to look at you, that you was a labouring under an unrequited attachment to some young woman, said Sam. The Fat Boy shook his head. "Well," said Sam, "I am glad to hear it. Do you ever drink anything?" "I likes eating better," replied the boy. "Ah," said Sam, "I should have supposed that, but what I mean is, should you like a drop of anything as'd warm you? Ah, but I suppose you never was cold, with all them elastic fixtures, was you?" "Sometimes," replied the boy, "and I likes a drop of something, when it's good." "Oh, you do you?" said Sam. "Come this way, then." The Blue Lion tap was soon gained, and the Fat Boy swallowed a glass of liquor without so much as winking, a feat which considerably advanced him in Mr. Weller's good opinion. Mr. Weller having transacted a similar piece of business on his own account, they got into the cart. "Can you drive?" said the fat man. "I should rather think so," replied Sam. "There then," said the Fat Boy, putting the reins in his hand and pointing up a lane. "It's as straight as you can go, you can't miss it." With these words the Fat Boy laid himself affectionately down by the side of the codfish, and placing an oyster barrel under his head for a pillow, fell asleep instantaneously. "Well," said Sam, "of all the cool boys ever I set my eyes on, this here young gentleman is the coolest. Come, wake up, young Dropsy." But as young Dropsy evinced no symptoms of returning animation, Sam Weller sat himself down in front of the cart, and, starting the old horse with a jerk of the rein, jogged steadily on towards the Manor Farm. Meanwhile, Mr. Pickwick and his friends, having walked their blood into active circulation, proceeded cheerfully on. The paths were hard, the grass was crisp and frosty, the air had a fine, dry, bracing coldness, and the rapid approach of the grey twilight, slate-coloured is a better term in frosty weather, made them look forward with pleasant anticipation to the comforts which awaited them at their hospitable entertainers. It was the sort of afternoon that might induce a couple of elderly gentlemen in a lonely field to take off their greatcoats and play at leapfrog in pure lightness of heart and gaiety. And we firmly believe that had Mr. Tupman at that moment proffered a back, Mr. Pickwick would have accepted his offer with the utmost avidity. However, Mr. Tupman did not volunteer any such accommodation, and the friends walked on, conversing merrily. As they turned into a lane they had to cross, the sound of many voices burst upon their ears, and, before they had even had time to form a guess to whom they belonged, they walked into the very centre of the party who were expecting their arrival, a fact which was first notified to the Pickwickians by the loud "Hurrah!" which burst from old Wardle's lips when they appeared in sight. First, there was Wardle himself, looking, if that were possible, more jolly than ever. Then there were Bella and her faithful Trundle, and lastly there were Emily and some 8 or 10 young ladies who had all come down to the wedding, which was to take place the next day, and who were in as happy and important a state as young ladies usually are on such momentous occasions. And they were, one and all, startling the fields and lanes, far and wide, with their frolic and their laughter. The ceremony of introduction, under such circumstances, was very soon performed, or we should rather say that the introduction was soon over, without any ceremony at all. In 2 minutes thereafter, Mr. Pickwick was joking with the young ladies who wouldn't come over the stile while he looked, or who, having pretty feet and unexceptionable ankles, preferred standing on the top rail for 5 minutes or so, declaring that they were too frightened to move, with as much ease and absence of reserve or constraint as if he had known them for life. It is worthy of remark, too, that Mr. Snodgrass offered Emily far more assistance than the absolute terrors of the stile, although it was a full 3 feet high and had only a couple of stepping stones, would seem to require, while one black-eyed young lady in a very nice little pair of boots, with fur around the top, was observed to scream very loudly when Mr. Winkle offered to help her over. We'll crack on with this tomorrow. Bye for now.